Isn't it strange how a crowded world with more than 8 billion people can still feel so empty, that we're always connected, always within reach, yet somehow we feel further apart than ever? We reach for our phones before we even fully wake up. Our eyes adjust to the artificial glow before they meet the morning light. There's always something waiting for us. A message, a meme, a video, a post, whatever it is. And so we consume, mindlessly at times, hungrily at others, as if the next piece of information will finally make us feel whole, and apparently, it never does. Maybe it's the way conversations have changed, the way it's reduced to blue and grey bubbles, to emojis standing in for emotions, to a like button replacing the need to say, I see you, I hear you, I care. Or maybe it's the way our world moves, too fast, too distracted, too full of things designed to steal our attention, leaving very little room for real presence. And so we sit in rooms filled with people, each lost in their own digital world, together, yet apart. Maybe it's the way we live now, in cities packed with strangers, in routines that leave no space for serendipity, in work that drains our mental health, in entertainment that numbs our soul, a culture that confuses busyness with purpose. We always act like we're too busy, too tired, too independent to need anyone, yet late at night, when the distractions settle, there's a quiet that feels too loud, a reminder that something is missing. Psychologists say loneliness isn't just a feeling, it's a biological response, as real as hunger, as real as pain. Dr. John Cacioppo, a neuroscientist who spent decades studying social isolation, found that the brain reacts to loneliness the same way it does to physical threats. The amygdala, or the part of the brain that's responsible for detecting danger, becomes more active during this time of loneliness. Our stress hormones flood the system, cortisol rises, blood pressure increases, the body becomes tense, like it's preparing for a danger that it doesn't even understand what. And over time, loneliness carves itself into our biology. It weakens the immune system, disrupts sleep, and the worst of all, it shortens our lifespan. That's why chronic loneliness is considered just as harmful as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. At least that's what Dr. Julianne Holt-Lunstad found in her research. But the cruelest part isn't just what loneliness does to the body, it's what it does to the mind. When we feel disconnected for too long, the brain begins to change the way it sees the world. Dr. Stephanie Cacioppo, a neuroscientist who continued her late husband's research, explains that loneliness makes us hypervigilant. We start to perceive social interactions as more threatening than they actually are. It's the reason why a delayed text feels like rejection. A short reply sounds colder than it is, because the more we feel alone, the more we expect to be left out, and the more we pull away. And all of a sudden, it becomes a cycle that feeds itself, trapping us in the very thing we're trying to escape. And maybe that's the cruelest part of loneliness. It doesn't just make us feel alone, it makes the world itself feel colder, emptier, stripped of warmth and meaning. It alters our perception, warping the way we interpret reality. And perhaps that's why philosophers have spent centuries trying to straighten out this feeling, this sense that the world, at its core, is indifferent to us. Albert Camus called it the absurd. It's the dissonance between our need for meaning and a world that refuses to provide it, a world that moves too fast to care. And maybe that's what modern loneliness is, not just an absence, but a contradiction, the craving for connection met with shallow substitutes, the hunger for depth drowned in distraction. We crave presence but settle for proximity. We crave meaning but drown in the shallow. We have more ways to speak than ever before, yet fewer reasons to listen. In Camus's eyes, the absurd comes from our desire for clarity in a universe that offers none. We seek belonging in a world that feels indifferent. And so, we chase distractions, throw ourselves into work, into entertainment, into anything that numbs the burden of solitude. Yet the moment we pause, the feeling returns, louder than before. The modern world has perfected the illusion of connection. A like, a comment, a message, it all feels like proof that we are seen, that we exist in someone's mind for at least a moment. But these interactions are fleeting, skin deep. The paradox of choice tells us that having infinite ways to communicate doesn't bring us closer. It overwhelms us, leaving us lost in a sea of surface-level exchanges, and the more options we have, the more disconnected we feel. Camus argued that to live fully, we must embrace the absurd, to stop searching for meaning in places that will never provide it, and instead, we create it for ourselves. Perhaps loneliness too is something to be embraced rather than escaped, not by drowning it in distractions, but by leaning into the spaces it creates, in the silence, in the depth, in the conversations that don't fit neatly into a status update. We spend so much time running from loneliness, treating it like an enemy to defeat. We always try to fill the silence with noise, to fill the emptiness with distractions. But what if loneliness isn't just something to escape? What if, in the silence, something is waiting to be heard? Psychologists call it productive solitude, the kind of aloneness that doesn't shrink us, but expands us. Dr. Sherry Turkle, a psychologist from MIT, argues that in an age of constant connection, we've lost the ability to be alone, and because of that, we struggle to be truly present with others. When we never sit with ourselves, we never learn who we are, and without that, how can we ever form real connections? Nietzsche once wrote that great things are accomplished in solitude. He believed that to think deeply, to create, to grow, we must be willing to step away from the crowd, not as an escape, but as a return, to the self, to clarity, to what actually matters. It's no coincidence that some of the greatest thinkers, artists, and writers spent time alone. Virginia Woolf called it a room of one's own. Thoreau sought it in the woods, and even in ancient times, Stoic philosophers like Seneca believed that being alone was the only way to truly understand life. Yet modern life teaches us the opposite, that to be alone is to be incomplete, that solitude is something to fear. But what if we've misunderstood it? What if loneliness isn't an emptiness, but rather a doorway? Because when we are alone without distractions, the default mode network in the brain becomes more active. It's the system responsible for self-reflection, memory, and the kind of deep thinking that helps us make sense of our lives. This is where creativity happens, where deep thought happens, where we process the things we've been too busy to feel. But the hardest part of solitude isn't the silence, it's what the silence brings, the thoughts we've buried for so long, and the questions we've always ignored. Most of us never sit with those questions long enough to find out. We'd rather turn on a show, scroll through a feed, or text someone just to fill the space. But if we never allow ourselves to be alone, we'd never truly know ourselves. And if we never know ourselves, every connection we make will be built on something fragile, on distraction, on avoidance, on a fear of emptiness. So maybe loneliness isn't the problem. Maybe it's an invitation to be still, to listen, to understand. Because once we stop fighting the silence, we might just find that it was never empty at all. There's a difference between being alone and feeling alone. The first is a state of being, the second, a state of mind. But when loneliness has settled deep, the two start to feel the same. But solitude isn't the enemy. It's not something to escape, it's something to understand. Because when we sit with it long enough, we start to see that being alone isn't the same as being abandoned. That emptiness isn't always a void to be filled, but a space where something new can grow and thrive. People think solitude is about shutting the world out, but it's actually not. Solitude is about letting yourself in, about learning to be your own company, but not in a forced, self-improvement kind of way, rather in the way you'd learn to understand a friend, with patience, with curiosity, with kindness. And maybe that's the real change that we need in this modern world. Seeing solitude not as something to survive, but as something that holds its own quiet kind of warmth. A space where you can hear yourself think. A moment where you can just exist, without needing to be seen, to be replied to, or to be validated. Because no matter how much love we have in our lives, there will always be moments of loneliness. And maybe the goal isn't to get rid of them. Maybe the goal is to love whatever is inside, the way we love everyone outside.